So this is the Amazfit Falcon, and this is much different than any other Amazfit where they're aiming at that premium sports watch market using high-end materials like a titanium case and a sapphire lens. Then they tossed in dual-band GPS, navigation features including the ability to use a GPX route, and even has support for external Bluetooth heart rate monitors and cycling power meters. So they're really looking at that premium outdoor adventure crowd with this watch, but are all those features and those high-end materials really worth the $500 price tag? Well, that's what we're going to find out in today's video. How's it going, folks? I'm Duz with DuzFit, and I've been testing out the new Amazfit Falcon for the last couple months, and in today's video, we're going to find out what this thing is all about, from what it offers in terms of hardware, what kind of software features it has, including some of the training performance feedback, and then just like all my reviews, I'll be going into a ton of detail into actual sports and fitness performance with activities like running, cycling, as well as weight training, just to see how it actually compares with other premium outdoor-focused sports watches like the Garmin Fenix, the Garmin Epix, and the COROS Vertex 2. Now, Amazfit's basically known for offering budget-friendly, fitness-focused smartwatches that offer a good amount of features for the money. But this new Falcon takes a huge departure from that strategy by going big with premium materials, but that also does come at a cost, where this is easily double, if not triple, the cost of nearly any other Amazfit watch. Did that gamble pay off? Well, I was actually quite surprised with this advice, but that is in both good ways as well as bad ways, which we'll get into all of that in this video. So from a hardware standpoint, the Falcon uses premium materials like a titanium case as well as a sapphire lens for increased scratch resistance. They definitely went with, in my opinion, a pretty rugged and aggressive design, and it certainly stands out from their other devices. In terms of dimensions, it's pretty similar to something like a Garmin Epix, where it has around a 47 to 49 millimeter case depending on which way you measure it, and it's also about the same thickness. And for my 185 millimeter circumference wrist, it fits about right. I'm glad they didn't go any bigger. Now, the Falcon uses what they call a unibody construction, so basically the case is entirely made out of metal, which is certainly premium from the material standpoint, but having an all-metal construction does translate to the weight a little bit. So the Falcon comes in at 82 grams with the stock band, and for comparison, the Garmin Epix with the stock band weighs about 70 grams, and the difference there is that the Epix, although it does have a titanium bezel and back, it uses a resin case versus the all-metal construction on the Falcon. And then for the cases themselves, the Falcon comes in right around 63.5 grams, and the Epix case comes in around 47 grams. And for how that weight actually translates into wearability, it feels pretty much on par with other watches in this range, maybe just a touch heavier, but really not that big a deal. And then from a durability standpoint, this thing looks fantastic even after a few months of use. The case looks great, the sapphire lens is perfect, and it's held up well. Oh, and I should also mention that it has a 20 ATM water resistance rating, so it's going to be perfectly fine for pretty much anything except for actual scuba diving. Oh, and really quick, if you're finding the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor, just quickly hit that like button down below. It's a small little thing that you can do that'll help this video and the channel quite a bit, and I appreciate it. Another similarity to the Garmin Epix is that the Falcon has an AMOLED display, and the Falcon has a 1.28-inch diameter display with a resolution of 416 by 416 pixels. And this display is great. It's super crispy, but it's also super bright. They claim 1,000 nits of brightness, and I can believe it. It's incredibly easy to see both indoors and outdoors. Out of the box, the Falcon uses a gesture mode to wake up the display, so basically you have to turn your wrist and then the display wakes up. And this is pretty typical from what you'll see from watches with AMOLED displays, because although super bright, these kinds of displays also consume a lot of battery. However, the Falcon does also come with an always-on display mode where it kind of switches to this simpler watch face so you can see your time at a glance, but it does consume just a little bit more battery life. And that does bring us to battery life. So out of the box with all the stock settings, the Falcon can get up to 14 days, which is awesome, but the stock settings are just using the gesture mode and not using the always on display. The default heart rate measurement during the day was set to every 10 minutes, and then the SpO2 sensor was also off by default. And of course, that 14 days will also depend on how many outdoor activities that you track, but even with about an hour-long outdoor activity per day, I was still getting about 9 to 10 days out of it, which is pretty darn decent. However, when you start to adjust some settings that you'll likely use, like increasing the all-day heart rate measurement frequency, turning on the SpO2 sensor during sleep, and enabling the always-on display, it actually still does get pretty decent battery life, where I was getting about 6 days out of it. So very much on par with one of the closest comparisons to this watch being the Garmin Epix. One thing to note though about that always-on display mode is that you have to enable a separate setting to have the always-on display enabled during workouts, which I actually thought was a nice touch to have it separated so you could have a specific setting just for workouts. But again, just note this will definitely reduce the battery life a little bit more with this enabled. To get around the device, it uses a combination of a touchscreen along with 4 physical buttons, and this was one of my first surprises with the Falcon. So for the most part, they've done a very good job making sure that you can still operate most of the functions on this watch with either the touchscreen or the buttons, and this is super important from a sports standpoint. So let's say that you're running or doing some other sort of activity and you want to quickly pause your workout. So if you only had a touchscreen, that can be challenging to do as you're kind of moving along. But with the Falcon, you can pause and resume your workout, you can initiate a lap, and you can change data pages all with buttons or the touchscreen. And when you complete your workout, again, you can use either touchscreen or the physical buttons to pause, save, and finish. So I just really appreciate the fact that they actually put thought into this, because during workouts, when you're moving around a lot, or if your hands are sweaty, or if you have gloves on, it's just much easier to use buttons. But again, they allow you to use the touchscreen if that's what you prefer. And then for all the health and sports focused sensors and hardware it has on board, it has a heart rate sensor, it has an SpO2 sensor for measuring blood oxygen saturation levels, it has an ambient light sensor, it has a gyroscope, a barometric altimeter, as well as a dual band satellite chipset. In addition to all that, you can even pair an external Bluetooth heart rate strap as well as cycling power meters in addition to Bluetooth headphones. It also has sleep tracking, where it'll give you a sleep score and it'll also attempt to track your sleep phases. However, I found these sleep scores to be a little bit, I guess you could say, overly encouraging, I guess you would say, where they're always much higher than any other device I was using to track sleep, and it didn't necessarily reflect how I actually felt in the morning. And then in terms of what kind of sports it can track, it has a ton built in. I think over 150 profiles or something like that, from everything from all the normal stuff you'd expect, like running, cycling, swimming, both in the pool as well as open water swimming. It has triathlon and multi-sport support. It has outdoor recreation profiles like skiing and snowboarding, plenty of gym-based profiles. There's even dance and combat-based activities, and even, wait for it, board games. So that's right, if you want to track your epic chess or checkers game, you can totally do that. Now, the Falcon also has training and recovery feedback, where with each workout, it'll provide your training effect in regards to your aerobic and anaerobic training effect. So basically how that workout is impacting those two different systems. And then it'll also track your training load, VO2 max, as well as recovery time for longer term feedback. Now, in terms of how accurate those measurements will be, well, that's really where we start to get to the Achilles heel of the Falcon, where although it does provide this kind of information, it can be off depending on how you use it. So like here, it shows that my VO2 max is 45, but that is pretty far off from my actual VO2 max, which ranges anywhere from like 56 to the 60-ish range. And there is a reason for that discrepancy, which we'll get to here in just one bit. But another good surprise, though, is that the Falcon also has the ability to import a GPX route file for navigation, and this does show, again, that they've taken some good steps here in providing features for that outdoor adventure crowd. Now, it is just breadcrumb trail routing, though, and it doesn't have topo and landscape maps like what you can find on a COROS Vertex 2 or Apex 2 Pro, nor does it have the crazy amount of street and trail information like you get on a Garmin Epix or a Garmin Fenix. But even so, I think it's really cool that they have this functionality, and they even have a back to start feature with either a straight line option or a trackback feature that follows along the route that you took. Another interesting surprise is that they have a function on the watch where you're supposed to be able to share your activity heart rate with fitness apps on compatible devices. So what this should do is allow it to show up in apps like Zwift or a Peloton bike, so you can broadcast the heart rate that's being collected on your watch. Unfortunately, here's one of those bad surprises where I could not get the Falcon to show up on any apps that I typically use. So that's going to be Zwift, Trainer Road, and even Strava. And I tried on my iPad, my iPhone, and even my Google Pixel. The only app that I found that did actually pick it up was iSmoothRun on my iPhone. Unfortunately, even though iSmoothRun did recognize it as a heart rate sensor and was able to pair with it, heart rate actually wasn't showing up in the app. Oh, and then before we get into GPS and heart rate accuracy, I also did want to mention that you can sync all your activities with Strava. Okay, so now let's get into GPS and heart rate accuracy. So the Falcon comes with a dual band GPS chipset, and these kind of chipsets have been coming out on higher end devices in recent years, and the aim with this technology is to deliver better accuracy in challenging environments like around really tall buildings, a lot of heavy tree cover, or around really tall rock faces where satellite signals can kind of get a little bit iffy. But just because the device does have this sort of technology, the accuracy isn't necessarily equal just because it has the chipset. There's going to be other factors involved like the antenna design, which also can make a difference. So let's see how the Falcon did compared to some other devices with this exact same type of technology. So let's go ahead and first start with this road ride, and this was basically a ride all out in the wide open with little to no obstructions, and we see that the Falcon did great here when compared to some other devices. The only thing that I did notice though is that the elevation gain was pretty far off from all the other devices I was using as references, as well as the corrected elevation figure in Strava, so that's something to look out for. But in terms of the finer detail of the actual GPS tracks, the Falcon performed really well here, and there was nothing over the course of this entire ride where I could find a fault. But now let's take a look at a couple examples of the running. So here we see that the Falcon was close, but just a smidge under the other devices in terms of the total distance. And if we take a close look at the GPS tracks, it's definitely not like there were any huge errors or anything like that. It produced decent tracks, but just not quite as accurate as the other devices. Like here, coming out of this tunnel, we see that the Falcon made more of a beeline rather than following the curve of the trail, and then it also wandered a bit off trail for a while before getting kind of back on track. From there, it was pretty good for a while, but then over here, it cut this corner just ever so slightly. Again, there were no big faults, and these GPS tracks are fine, but just not quite as crispy as the others. But here's a run in a completely different environment, and a lot more challenging environment at that. So this is in the downtown area of Petaling Jaya in Malaysia, and we see that the Falcon did a good job here in terms of the total distance, but we should also take a close look at the GPS tracks. So starting out, things were looking pretty good out of all the devices I was using. The Apex 2 Pro wandered a little bit, but no big deal really. On this first corner here, we see that the Falcon cut in just slightly, but then got back on track nicely. I did notice that there was a bit of wandering from time to time though, where it was just a little bit off the actual path that I was taking. Overall, I'd say that the Falcon has decent accuracy, but not quite to the level of some of the other devices I was using with the same kind of technology. Perfectly acceptable probably for nearly all of us, but not quite the cream of the crop. And really quick before we get into heart rate accuracy, I also want to talk about how well the Falcon did at estimating distances running indoors on a treadmill. And for the first run that I did, well, it came out quite a bit short. However, what is nice is that you do have the ability to calibrate it when you go to save your run to the distance recorded on the treadmill. And once I did do that, all the subsequent runs that I did lined up pretty darn well. So that calibrate distance function does seem to make a difference, which is nice to see. Okay, so now on to heart rate accuracy, and I'm not going to really beat around the bush here, but basically the heart rate sensor is not going to be the reason that you want to buy this watch, but there is a little bit of saving grace here. So for example, here's some indoor cycling, and this sort of activity should be a very easy test for wrist-based optical heart rate sensors where nearly all watches perform very well. But as you can see from this example, it took a while for it to lock onto heart rate, and then it had a very strange 5 minutes or so here where it had spikes. And you can see there's really nothing crazy going on with this workout. It was just a nice, easy, steady state workout, but it was still wandering. And then here's another example where things were a bit worse. But on this workout, things were actually much better, but at the beginning, there was some shakiness going on that was kind of strange to see. Oh, and then here's another workout that I did just recently, just to see if any of the firmware updates that came out over the last couple months had any effect. And then for some examples for running, these are a couple treadmill runs that I did, and I think the results sort of speak for themselves. And then taking it outside running, I saw this very consistent thing for the first 8 to 10 minutes or so of these runs, it tracked quite high, but then it actually did a better job after it locked on. But as you can see here at the tail end of this run, it was just kind of slow to react to picking up the changes in heart rate. And then for weight training, again, we see that higher reading at the beginning of this workout and then really high readings during these intervals at the end. And then for one final example, we see basically the same thing here where it wasn't all that awesome for these first few sets here. It actually wasn't bad for these sets in the middle, but then with the high intensity intervals at the end, basically kind of failed out. So looping back to all that training recovery feedback that the Falcon provides, you really do need to use an external heart rate monitor for any of that feedback to be meaningful. If we look back at nearly all those examples, it was tracking my heart rate quite a bit higher than it actually was, which will throw off the metrics, including VO2 max. So there's a lot of good things going for this watch. The battery life is awesome, the durability seems good, the display is great, and GPS accuracy is very decent. The heart rate sensor is really the big gripe I have with this watch, and it's basically producing similar results to other Amazfit watches I've tested in the past. The saving grace, though, of course, is that it can pair to external heart rate monitors, but if you're not a fan of wearing an external heart rate strap, you may want to consider different watches if you're planning on doing a lot of training with this watch. And from a software perspective, it really did surprise me as well, mostly in good ways, like the ability to pair external Bluetooth heart rate strap as well as Bluetooth cycling power meters, as well as some of the navigation features. Disappointingly, that broadcast heart rate feature didn't seem to work for me, and I did see some other threads on Reddit with some Amazfit owners reporting kind of the same thing. So to wrap things up, let's now talk about price. So the premium materials like the titanium hardware and the Sapphire lens, they are not cheap to manufacture. And although some of the software features did surprise me, mostly in good ways, the feature set still is more along the lines of about a 300 to 350 watch in the whole scheme of things. And that's where it's going to be a little bit tough when you look at that $500 price tag. You're really going to be paying for those materials. And on the software side of things, it comes up a little bit short when compared to, let's say, something like a COROS Apex 2 Pro, which has topo and landscape maps. And it even comes with a Sapphire lens and titanium hardware, but in all fairness, not a full metal construction that's found on the Falcon. But when compared to something like the Garmin Epix, well, the Epix actually costs twice as much as the Amazfit Falcon, but if the Epix has similar materials, a similar display, as well as similar battery life, why does it cost twice as much? Well, it really does come down to all those software features. First of all, the Epix has even more robust topo and landscape maps than even the Apex 2 Pro. Then there's a huge suite of training and performance feedback features. There's training tools like Pace Pro and Climb Pro. There's even more recovery tools like HRV status, as well as training readiness, which helps you assess how ready you are for your next workout. Then the Epix compared to pretty much any external sensor under the sun. There's also the Garmin Connect app, which is just a bit more mature. And then there's also Garmin Connect on the web, where you can dive into your data even further, as well as create courses based on heat maps based on where other people are exploring. But if what you're looking for is a nice durable watch with a great display as well as great battery life made out of premium materials, and you don't necessarily care about a lot of those other software features, then the Falcon may be worth a look. And I'll have an affiliate link down in the description below where you can check out the latest pricing. And if you have any questions about the Falcon that I didn't cover in this video, make sure to leave those in the comments section down below. And on your way down there, if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor and quickly hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more super in-depth reviews just like this one that are coming soon. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.